We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Hello everybody, welcome to the next installment of my Masters of Evil marathon. Today we're going to be talking about the very first female character to ever be featured in my videos. I'm of course talking about the Thor villain, Amora the Enchantress. Amora was born somewhere in all the different 9 realms of Asgard. When she was about a teenager, she underwent sorcery and magic training from a very powerful Asgardian sorceress named Karnilla. Later on, Karnilla would banish her from her teachings because she thought that she wasn't mature enough to handle the sort of power she was teaching her. Amora decided that she would use her powers of mind control and seduction she had learned from the sorceress to basically influence and control the minds of all the sorcerers and mages all throughout Asgard to further and strengthen her magical skills. Along the way, she met up with Scourge the Executioner, a very powerful Asgardian warlord, whom she basically instructed and picked up as her companion and her hired muscle, I guess you could say. Her first encounter with Thor was during the early 60s whenever Thor had his regular mortal identity of Dr. Donald Blake. And Amora actually took on a human form and tried to seduce Thor, or Dr. Blake. And she also sent the Executioner after Jane Foster, Thor's love interest, to basically murder her, so that she could be with Thor for the rest of her life. Also, yeah, that's sort of one thing about the Enchantress that you may not know, is that she has a very, very big crush on the God of Thunder. This is one of the most unique aspects about her character, is the fact that she's generally an evil character, but when it comes to someone like Thor, she's sort of willing to try to do good in order to be with him. And her relationship with Thor in the comics is sort of similar to that of Batman and Catwoman, in the fact that they do genuinely care for each other, but their relationship never really goes anywhere because of their morals and because of their sort of sense of right and wrong. Thor is all about being selfless and, helping the innocent, while Amora, she's more towards looking out for herself and furthering her own goals and self-interest. Anyway, she and the Executioner would actually go on to join the Masters of Evil with Baron Zemo. Eventually, she would even create a new supervillain ally for the Masters of Evil, which is Power Man. The original Power Man, that is, not Luke Cage, whose name was Eric Jostin. And beyond her role in the Masters of Evil, Amora would just she would fluctuate back and forth between good and evil at certain points in the comics. She mostly tried to use her powers to seduce other supervillains into doing whatever she wants. At one point, I believe she tries to seduce and get Doctor Doom to do whatever she wants him to do, and and in return for Doom actually helping her in her supervillain career, she would actually repair Doom's incredibly scarred face. While this is certainly something that Victor Von Doom would want, he rejects her offer because he knows from experience that using magic to help himself always comes at a price. She is actually recruited by the Beyonder to fight against the superheroes on the Battle World during the Secret Wars storyline in the 80s. And one of the biggest impacts of her whole comic book tenure is during an event in the comics where the evil fire demon Surtur wages war against the Asgardians. Basically, after a long battle, Amora decides that she wants to help the Asgardian gods to fight against Surtur and his evil armies. This is probably one of the few points where she actually does something good for Asgard and for Thor. And after the war with Surtur is over, Thor and the Executioner, along with Amora, decide to travel into Hell to rescue all of the lost souls who have been sent there without any good purpose, to rescue the souls of all the people who died during the war. Eventually, they manage to escape from Hell, but since there's no one in, but there's this bridge that pretty much blocks their way from escaping, and the only one strong enough to lift up the bridge is Scourge. Scourge ends up dying in order to help Thor, Amora, and all the other lost souls escape from Hell. And there's a great little scene where Amora actually stops and he actually sobs and grieves for Scourge's passing. Because even though Scourge had a very strong love towards Amora, she never really shared that feeling with him. She always sort of used him just to carry out all of her plans, and basically used him as a muscle man of sorts. But since Scourge was always infatuated with her because of her spells of mind control and seduction, you never really took their relationship seriously, which is all the more surprising when you actually see her genuinely sobbing, because it does turn out that she did actually care for Scourge. This is definitely one of the biggest and most, this is definitely one of the most interesting things about her character, is that you never really know what her true intentions are. So Amora isn't so much of a villain as she is a central, neutral type of character. And Amora was actually killed recently in the comics because, well, it's not really recently that she was killed. Basically, in Asgard, in the comics, Ragnarok happened, and when it happened, Amora was killed during that event. However, Thor sought to rebuild Asgard on Earth, in Oklahoma specifically. And so he basically sort of resurrected all of the Asgardians who he thought were worthy to be gods, and all of the ones he didn't like were to remain as mortals. However, Loki, who is in the form of a mortal woman, somehow manages to gain control of his former powers, and he awakens all of Thor's enemies and basically tries to create a whole brand new attack on Asgard. Amora's pretty much remade into her old self, but she doesn't really care about helping Loki because all she wants to do is basically go to the World Tree and try to resurrect the man she cares about the most, Scourge, who's actually in Valhalla, strangely enough. And Thor, Iron Man, and Balder, all three of them show up and convince them that that isn't right and that it's not what Scourge would want. Eventually, Amora ends up saving Thor from getting murdered from Hela in an intense battle with the goddess of death. And that's pretty much her entire comic book history right there, or at least all that I can think of. I think Amora is definitely a very great enemy for Thor, in the fact that and she's beautiful but she's also powerful as hell. And I think she's definitely a great first addition for female supervillains on this list. Alright, stay tuned for the next video.